Hey, this is Mr. C, and thanks for tuning into your latest math lesson 4-4, solving multiplication and division equations. Our previous one was addition and subtraction. Now we're moving on to multiplication and division with variables. Once you're done writing your name and your date and the title, please unpause the video in 3, 2, 1. Here's your homework for 4-2. If you were wondering, yes, we did skip 4-3. And we're moving on to 4-4 today. Unpause the video when you have your answers corrected. In 3, 2, 1. So here's our first example, and as you know, you're not writing, but you are paying attention for a clue word and to what I say. All right, so let's zoom in here and get started. Solving multiplication and division equations. How can you get the variable alone in a multiplication equation? How can you get it by itself alone? Let's read this word problem. Juan is an artist. He sold 3 paintings for a total of $45. If all the paintings cost the same amount, how much did he charge for each painting? Solve the equation 3 times x equals 44. Well, I'm seeing from word problems that when they tell me 3 paintings and they ask, they don't know the amount that they cost, they're going to have 3, the amount of paintings, and then x stands for how much each costs. And so the total is $45. When they use the total, then that's a clue that it's probably going to be by itself on the other side of the equation. And they want to know today how much did each painting costs, and that's what x is. And so we're like, how do we get x? We know what 3 paintings cost. That costs $45. How do we find what 1 costs? And I'm sure that some of you can do this in your head, but we need to know how to do this written. So here's what we're thinking. We see on this scale, we see 3 x's, because each of these stands for a painting. And then over here we have 45 cubes. They're actually split very conveniently for us visually into 3 groups of equal cubes. And if we counted those, we would get our answer. And so we're going to think, how can I get x alone, 1x, and just one of those on one side of the equation with this equation? With this clue word of blue dolphin. All right. So I see that there's 3x, and we learned last lesson that we need to do the inverse of whatever's on the same side as x, which is times 3, to get x by itself. And so we know that dividing by 3 is the inverse of multiplying by 3, and we went over those again in the vocab notes. So we have 3x over here, and when we divide by 3, then you only have 1x on one side, and then when you divide this by 3, you'll only end up with 1 stack. And so if you divide 45 by 3, then you'll get x equals 15. So this is how it would actually look. Take a look at this, and as I'm looking over here, how to do our problem, I also realize that there's 2 steps. We need to do the inverse, and then we need to go back and check it. And I saw some of you doing this on your Chapter 3 test, and it made me so happy to see that you were checking your answers. You're like, oh, that's not right. And then you get to actually go back and retry it and get it right. So make sure you check your answers. We substituted 15 for x because we had x equals 15. Wherever there's an x, we put a 15 in here. We know this is read 3 times 15 equals 45. 45 does equal $45, so we know for a fact that he charged $15 for each painting. All right, so here are the vocab notes, as I was referring to before, and please write the inverse operations. Unpause the video in 3, 2, 1. So I just wanted to review very quickly what we did last lesson. So we know that we want to get x by itself. And we know this is 13 3/10 plus x equals 22.7. We want to get x by itself, so we need to do the inverse. We need to take away whatever was added here to x so we could get just x. We know x plus 13.3 is this big number, but we know that x is actually smaller. We need to take away this that's added. So you would subtract 13.3 because that's on the same side as x. And you're going to subtract that. You need to make sure you do the same amount to both sides. So when you subtract that, you get 0 plus x, which just is x. And over here I get 9.4. So my answer would be 9.4 equals x. Moving. Here's example 1. We know that example 1 Mr. C is going to do, but you need to have written down in your notes. But you don't know what exact part I want you to write down yet. So let's look up here. How can you get the variable alone in a division equation? All right, well, we learned about the inverse operations. So I'm thinking again, what is the inverse of division? So we have x divided by 2.5 equals 40. So I'm thinking, how can you get x alone on one side of the equation? X divided by 2.5 equals 40. I want to know what x equals. All right, well, if I multiply by 2.5, that will undo, which is the inverse of the dividing by 2.5. And that will come up with an answer where x is by itself. Well, how did we know to multiply by 2.5? Well, that's on the same side of the equal sign as x. And so we want x by itself. Multiplying by 2.5 is the inverse of dividing by 2.5. We know that. So this is what it would look like when you write it. And so this is actually what we're going to have written for our notes. I like how there's two steps, and make sure you have step 1 written. So step 1, I have my equation, and then I'm going to do the inverse, multiplying by 2.5 to both sides. Here you would get 100. Well, that's very interesting, Mr. C. When I write out this multiplication, I'm going to add these down, and I actually end up with 1,000. Well, I agree, this is 1,000, but, I see one number behind the decimal place, and we're going to go back 1, and we learned that in the previous chapter, so the answer is 100. So whenever we do these, we do step 1 and step 2, and step 2 is checking. So we want to substitute 100 for x. So whenever there's an x, there's actually going to be 100. When I divide 100 by 2.5, do I get 40? Well, I would start first with a problem like this. Oh, and I learned previously that we need to move the decimal out, and if I move it here, there's this invisible decimal here, and we move this back out as well. So our new problem would be 1,025 on the outside, and we want to know if that does equal 40. Well, 1 can't divide into 1 or 10, 25 can't divide into that, but 25 times 4 is 100. And at this point, I'm not done. There's still this other 0. I need to bring this down. And 25 can't go into 0, so that's 40. So I do agree that it checks. Make sure you also show your work in your notes like I wrote. We're moving on in 3, 2, 1. Here's example 2. Try to do both of these by yourself and then come back for the answers. I'm going to show you the answers to 1 and 2 in 3, 2, 1. Alright, so here are your answers for 1 and 2. I noticed that it said explain how to get the variable alone in each equation. It didn't actually say solve like it does down here. So I didn't solve, I just explained what you needed to do. You should divide each side by 18, because that's the inverse of multiplying by 18. And over here you need to multiply each side by 3.3, because that's the inverse of dividing by 3.3. Now I'm going to show you the answers by 3 and 4 in 3, 2, 1. Alright, so here are answers with the work if you want to know how I got these things. I paid careful attention to the decimal here, and I did need to annex a 0 and bring that down to finish the equation. I want to know, does this make sense? Does it make sense that about 12, if I divide that by 2, would be about 6? Yes, that makes absolute sense. So I think I have an answer. If I take 110, I would want to check that as well. Just like this, and we want to see if that equals 22. So make sure you show this in your work as well for number 4. And you want to see if that does equal 22. And we're moving on in 3, 2, 1. Here's independent or partners practice. Please pick only 3 and show your work for those. Moving on to show you the answers in 3, 2, 1. Here are your answers for your independent or partners practice. After you're done with that, please pick to do a group math game, Khan Academy, or make a math video using Explain Everything and upload that to the team drive, and that you will feel very good about yourself after doing that. And now we're going to show you the answers to the group math game. Alright, here are the answers to the group math game. Thank you for watching, and I hope you learned a lot. If you didn't know, you're awesome.